All right, good morning, boys and girls. We are starting a new book. We are starting The Boy Who Saved Baseball by John Ritter. And this book, let me just read the synopsis for you. So, it was the kind of game from which legends are born. Tom Gallagher is in a tight spot. The Dillontown baseball field is about to be torn down by developers, and he has to save it. After all, Dillontown is a baseball town of legends. It's where the great Dante Delgado became the best hitter baseball has ever known. Now, the fate of the entire town rests on the outcome of one baseball game, winner take all. If Tom's team loses, they lose their field too. But how can they possibly win? Just when everything seems hopeless, a mysterious boy named Cruz de la Cruz rides into town and claims to know the secret of hitting. Not to mention the secrets of Dante Delgado. Since he walked away from the game years ago, Delgado hasn't spoken a word to anyone. But that's not going to stop Cruz de la Cruz from helping Tom ask Delgado to coach the Dillontown team. It's a crazy idea, but it just might be Tom's only hope for saving his hometown. All right, let's get started, boys and girls. Chapter 1. Tom Gallagher sensed the ghostly calm even before he opened his eyes. In a hill town known for its harsh and wild winds, the morning broke without even the whisper of a breeze. Tom had hoped today would be as ordinary as possible. He'd woken early, dressed, and finished off a plate of his mother's chorizo con huevos, as he usually did on a Sunday morning. Then he'd walked outdoors to pay his friendly old neighbor, Doc Altenheimer, a friendly old visit, and as he usually did on Sundays. He stopped to pick up the paper at the foot of Doc's long driveway as usual, but today, Tom was planning to do something unusual. "Hey, Doc," he called as he hustled toward the huge White House. Padres are in third. "Well, what do you know?" Doc called back. "There's hope yet, isn't there?" The 87-year-old apple rancher sat at a yellow kitchen table set smack in the middle of his long front porch. He leaned out and slid a chair over the wooden deck boards. "Come have a seat, Tom." Doc talked like he moved, slow and easy. "Good to see a friendly face. My gosh, with that town hall meeting coming up tonight, everybody and their brother's been here lately trying to sell me on one fool plan or another." Doc's words hit Tom two ways. First, he felt instantly guilty since he was here to do the very same thing. Tom wanted to make sure once and for all that Doc understood this whole land development scheme some people were pushing for was a bad idea. Then he felt double nervous. Tom had spent all week working on the little speech. Never in his 12 and a half years had he done anything like that before, to write out a speech ahead of time in order to remember what to say when the time comes. Should be easy, right? All he had to do was step up and deliver his pitch just the way he'd practiced. Well, not so easy for Tom Gallagher. Even though his father was a teacher who spoke to the crowds and his mom was a school librarian who read to the crowds, Tom was far more comfortable keeping his thoughts to himself, even with his friends. "Yesterday," said Doc, "the mayor stopped by for about the 100th time. Him and that new banker fellow from Texas who'd been buying up all the land." Doc opened up the sports pages with a soft, tremoring hand. He spread out the baseball section so Tom could read him the scores. "Funny, ain't it, son? Now that it's all come down to me, it looks like I took over being the most popular and the least popular man in town at the same time." Tom puffed out a small laugh. He heard that phrase lots of times in these hills, but never in regards to Doc. There was a shadowy former pro baseball player named Dante Delgado, a one-time hometown hero who officially wore that title. Nowadays, the man was practically a hermit living on the top of Rattlesnake Ridge. After the mayor left, Doc continued, "The Historical Society came calling. Daisy Ramirez and that bunch of busybodies tried to tell me that this old broken-down baseball field was a historical monument, ought to be preserved. Well, I told them it's history, all right. Soon as I sell the land, it'll be history," Doc laughed. They didn't appreciate that. Sell the land? Wait a minute. Just yesterday, Tom had assured the other ball players, saying, "Trust me on this. Doc won't sell. He's a baseball man, and he loves these hills." He used to walk up his ridge, spot the perfect big leaf maple tree, trim off a branch, and make his own bat from it. He is on our side. Now, Tom wondered how he could have been so wrong. You mean, you might? You might actually? I'm leaning that way, son, said Doc. Trouble is, I've gone round and round on this deal so many times, I feel like a windmill in a windstorm. But tonight's the big night, isn't it? Gotta let everyone know tonight. He took out a handkerchief and held it against his mouth and coughed. Now, Tom told himself. Tell him now. Don't wait another second. Tom scooted his chair closer. He gripped the seat bottom and then he scooted back. He closed one eye and tried to focus on his mission, and then he closed the other and he saw the words, but he couldn't make himself speak. I ain't a fool, Tom. Sure, it means more traffic and noise and bulldozers kicking up dust all year. But all in all, I think it will be good for us. This place is dying, son. And as far as I can see, the only way to pump life and spirit back into Dillontown. Open up the highway, build new roads, new homes, and bring more jobs. Those builders did nice enough work down the hill. I expect they'll do the same up here. He tucked his handkerchief away. Wouldn't be selling them my land if I didn't. Jumping jackrabbits? What do you do with what do I need with $6 million, man my age? That knocked Tom nearly off his chair backwards. $6 million? That much? Well, Doc, he thought, you could give it to me. But Tom had never considered the idea that a man might reach a point in life when even $1 million was not important. And Tom had seen the new ballpark down in Lakeview Mesa. The shiny chain link fence that store-bought grass, all neat and trim. He'd seen the new baseball camp whose summer team began the annual challenge game against the Dillontown camp 3 years ago. Some challenge. Each year they'd beaten Tom and the Dillontown Wildcats by at least 10 runs. Maybe brand new and improved was better. For the next half hour, Tom pored over the sports pages with Doc, their usual ritual. He called out each game result and the box score highlights, and each time Doc had something wise and thoughtful to contribute. Don't count them Pirates out of it just yet. These young players got more heart and hunger than all them overpaid millionaires combined. Tom nodded, but in his brain, all he could do was yell at himself. Why didn't I talk to him sooner? Why'd I keep putting it off? And why can't I tell him now that I think we're losing the greatest ballpark in the world? With 100 years of baseball swirling its walls and a right-hand batter's box that holds the very same dirt that Dante Delgado once dug into and spat into on his way to the world record books. Slowly, Tom found the next score, the Yankees game, and was about to read it when Doc spoke up again. You know, I've been here my whole life. My wife and son, God hold them close, lived and died right here. Even in hard times, this town's been good to me. He set his elbows on the table and laced his fingers together, and I just hope to return the favor, that's all. Tom sat back and stared off into the distance. From Doc's front porch, he could see the spires and crosses of several churches rising above the scattered rooftops of the town below. He could see the shops on Main and Mercado, the little adobe post office and town hall, the La Plaza de Oro, where the cluster of old ladies in white scarves stood feeding the birds before making their way to Mass. Closer, near the apple groves and farmlands, he could see the ancient baseball fields, Lucky Strike Park, built on a dry lake bed 100 years ago by Doc's father and a gang of crusty gold miners, including Mr. Long John Dillon himself, the founder of the town. Doc still owned a Lucky Strike Park, but more importantly, he owned a total of 320 acres of prime real estate, which was the key to the whole deal. Doc's land was where the golf course would go, where the best homes would be built, and where the new lake had been planned, a lake that would drown the town's baseball field under 15 feet of water. Doc coughed again, wiped his mouth, while his eyes seemed fixed on empty air about halfway to the orange trees on the edge of his front lawn. For 55 years, I delivered just about every baby born in this town, Tom, including you. So I figure I can deliver the town this one last gift, a new park and a chance for new life. Tom's stomach retched tighter. He lowered his head. No sense now saying anything. Doc had made his decision, and he'd made his peace with it. Ever since the early 1900s, the Altenheimer family had leased Lucky Strike Park to the townspeople for $1 a year. This summer, the 100-year lease was up. And over that 100 years, Dillontown had shrunk from 5,000 people down to 559, give or take. Meanwhile, to the west, an ocean of red-tiled roofs, houses, and malls had crept along the land, coming closer and closer, like a pool of blood oozing up out of the earth itself. Once those builders put in a spankin' new field, Tom, it'll be a whole lot better for your team, don't you think? Better facilities, better equipment. My gosh, look what it did for those boys down the hill. For some reason, hearing that fired up a spark in Tom. At the same moment, a breeze began to stir. Those guys aren't so great, he said. Just because they got a fancy park with batting cages and everything doesn't make them such great ball players. Our field's just as good, and we like it. The east wind gusted up and rustled the paper on the table. Tom slammed his arm down to catch it. Then he said something that surprised him as much as it seemed to startle Doc. Shoot! We could stomp those guys like a bush on fire any day of the week. Doc pulled back and smiled. Well, you haven't done it yet. Tom folded his arms. Still, we could beat them if we really wanted to, like the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like you said, we got heart. We do. And hunger. Those other games just never meant anything. That's all. Doc sat a moment longer. I like your spirit, Thomas. Your age, I was the same way. He took the black pen from his pocket, and on the sports page margin, he began to write. Doc often left Tom a few words to ponder. Words of encouragement, he called them. This time he wrote, even in the dead of night, the sun is always shining. He replaced the pen. Nice to hear you speak up, though, but the plain fact is times have changed. I'm sorry, Tom. It's too late. As Doc had promised that night in front of 500 people sitting on 500 rickety metal folding chairs with another few dozen crowded around the edges of the rickety-crickety town hall, he let the whole world know what he decided to do. Tom sat in the far back row with Frankie Flores, his best friend, alongside Ramon Sabala, and a few other kids who signed up for the 12 and under Wildcat baseball camp. Sitting nearby were Tom's parents, along with Rachel Gleason, the quietest girl in school, and her sister Tara, who was not so little, but as she put it, big boned. Next to them sat Frankie's loudmouth cousin Maria. They all strained to see the color graphics the builder flashed on the screen, showing a fancy ranch houses with mountain views, a golf course with slick greens and white sand traps, and a combo sports field. Next came shots of the families playing soccer, golfers hitting golf balls, and little baby ducks floating on the blue lake. It was all fancy and a professional show, and Tom could tell people were impressed. Finally, the lights came on. Doc stood up and walked to the podium, and it seemed like the whole room sucked in one big breath at once. As I've said all along, Doc began, I only wanted what was best for this town. I'm sick of all the feuding and the brouhahas. Too old for all that. But I'm also too old to look over my land. While he spoke, Doc tipped back his white silk cowboy hat and took in the whole crowd with his silvery blue eyes. These men from Orange County came down here and made me a decent offer. They'll widen the road, put in some nice homes, throw up a new park for the kids. From the get-go, it all sounded good to me. Doc glanced at a cluster of other big landowners sitting right up front, including Ray Pruitt, a cattle rancher, Alabaster Jones, the bank president, and Mayor Oscar Calabaza. They all owned big spreads near Doc's land. They all knew that if Doc's property got developed, then the value of their land would go sky high. But early this morning, Doc continued, a fine young ball player came to visit me, and he had a few things to say that put a hitch in my hat. Tom's heart thumped against his chest bones like a bad hot grounder. He sank low in his seat. Doc wetted his lips. Now, I ain't much of a churchgoer, you folks know that, but here's what I do believe. Dillontown is a baseball town, and that makes whatever we do here a baseball decision. And since I've always believed that baseball is God's game, then I'll put the fate of this town in his hands. The whole crowd rumbled and swiveled. They all turned to ask their neighbors if they'd heard that right. Had they heard what that old codger said? Doc raised his hand. Now hold on. Don't jump out ahead. These fine gentlemen stood here and told us how beneficial their housing project has been for the families down the hill. How much more advantage and opportunity their children have than our kids do up here. And I felt the same way. But what young Tom Gallagher said today set me wondering. Is it the new facilities that would help this town the most, or a new spirit? His eyes roamed the room. So here's what I've decided to do. Tom sank even lower. Everyone twisted and turned to look at him. Doc's voice rose up loud and strong. I hereby propose a good old-fashioned baseball game to settle the matter. A team from that new summer camp down the road versus a team from our camp here in town. Like they've done in the past few years, only this time it's really going to mean something. One big game, do or die. If our team wins, I pull out of this deal and this town stays the way it is. If they lose, bring on the bulldozers. And he touched the brim of his hat. Thank you kindly. He stepped away from the podium. No one said a word. His boot clicks filled the hall. Tom was now crouched on the floor. Maria Flores, tall and lean, towered above, one hand on her hip. You said he was on our side, she hissed. That you were going to talk to him for us. What did you say? I don't know, Tom squeaked out. I didn't say anything. I don't get it, said Rachel. Us? Mr. Gallagher, does he mean us? Tom's dad, the camp coach, had a look on his face that said it all. His mouth hung open like a sand trap. His eyes were as big as golf balls. That's not fair, said Tara. We'll never win, and when we lose, everyone will hate us and blame us for the rest of our lives. Frankie leaned over and swatted Tom's shoulder. I kind of like the idea, he said. I bet every girl in town will be at that game. Ramon shook his head. You say that about a funeral, you dog. Tom buried his head in his hands. You guys, it will be a funeral. Ours. And that was precisely the feeling Tom Gallagher woke up with the next morning, as if he was going to a funeral. Chapter 2. The stranger rode in from the east. Under the rays of the rising sun, through the dust of the swirling wind, the horseman rode down slope, down Rattlesnake Ridge, just as Black Jack Buck had seen in a vision, dreamed in a prophecy a century ago. In his rifle scabbard, laced low and tight, he carried a baseball bat made of hand-cut mountain maple, custom lathed and sanded to a shine. Some say he rode in on a Santa Ana wind. Some say on the lonesome trill of an elderberry flute. But everyone in this old town, Dillontown, set high in the California wild back near the Mexican line, will always remember that day. It was a day of disaster, following a night of disaster, following several years of discord and disaster. The day Cruz de la Cruz came to town. Monday morning, Tom Gallagher lay in bed listening to the windy rustle of the trees outside as a wave of sadness broke inside him. He hated that feeling. Imagine feeling sad in the middle of summer vacation. Imagine feeling sad on the first day of baseball camp. But when you knew it would be the last camp ever on a special field, when you knew that the mountains you roamed by foot and by horseback would soon be scraped off and bulldozed flat, and when you knew it would be your own dumb fault, it was hard not to feel sad. If only Tom had known what Doc Altenheimer was going to say last night, he would have kept his mouth shut and avoided this whole mess. But Tom also realized that keeping his mouth shut had caused this whole mess. If only he had spoken up sooner. Tom knew how his parents felt about the deal. Besides running the Wildcat baseball camp, his mom and dad both worked at Scrub Oak Creek Scrub Oak Community School. We've got empty shops up Main Street and down Mercado, his dad said. We need this housing project to bring in more people and build up the town's tax base. More taxes means more money for schools and libraries. Tom's mother wouldn't have it. Our schools and libraries will do just fine without all those dreary look-alike houses and the traffic and the noise. When I look out my window, Jerry, I want to see mountaintops, not rooftops. And you used to say the same thing. Besides, it's been proven that mountain views are soothing the soul. They relax the brain. Well, sure, I know that, but at some point we need to think about where our money will come from, and mountains don't pay taxes. For the most part, they left it at that, a hot topic that sizzled between them. Tom, get up! Frankie Flores ran into the bedroom and cannonballed on his best bud's bed. Baseball camp, compadre! Tom wrapped the pillow around his head. Get off! You're suffocating me! Frankie slid down the floor. Oh, my girlfriends say the same thing. I'll leave them breathless. He bopped Tom on the thigh. Come on, no time to snooze. We got to cruise and get everybody ready, Freddie. Slowly, Tom rolled over. The poor guy, he thought. Frankie didn't realize the world had changed overnight. This disaster was upon them. That the field where they had grown up playing one-on-one make-believe baseball games, the fields where the San Diego Padres battled the New York Yankees for 9 full innings, where the Cubs met the Cardinals, or the Mariners faced the Mets on an April morn would soon only be a memory. What's the use, said Tom. No one's going to show up now. No one wants to get slaughtered in the big game and have everyone blame them for turning Dillontown into Lakeview Mesa 2. You think we're going to get slaughtered? With me and Will and Jose Maria and Kevin and everybody? Forget it, mano. We're going to be heroes. And you are too. I'll make sure of that. He backhanded Tom on the leg. I mean, hey, you're my hermano, my bro, mi vato, eh? Tom didn't understand. He lay perfectly flat on his back, breathing slow, while staring at the tattered poster of Dante Delgado, the mystery man, on his closet door. After a moment, he shifted his gaze from Delgado to Tony Gwynn to Sammy Sosa, pinned above his computer screen. He always felt like these 3 baseball legends were watching him, ready to offer their wisdom. What would they say now if they thought he was giving up? Hey, buddy, Tom Gwynn would call out. Get up and go. I've told you 100 times you're a great player. Then Sammy Sosa would add, Tomas, escuche. You got more power than I ever had when I was 12. What's your secret? But the notorious Dante Delgado, the guy Tom considered the most amazing player who ever lived, he would only shrug and say, you want to end up like me? Fine, quit. Who's stopping you? Tom kept breathing, relaxing every muscle in his arms, back, shoulders, even his scalp. Today he would listen to Sosa and Gwynn. What's with the smile? Said Frankie. What's so funny? Tom wiggled his head, then popped up off the bed. Nothing. Later that morning, just before 9, Tom and Frankie headed out to the barn and across the backyard. Over their shoulders, they each carried a bag of baseball gear balanced high to compensate for the headwind. Mr. Gallagher stepped out of the kitchen and onto the back deck, clutching his clipboard and a box of new baseballs. Is that barn all cleaned up, gentlemen? Ready to go? The barn had a bunkhouse in the rear where the farm hands used to stay in the olden days. The boys in camp would be using the bathroom and showers in there. Clean as my grandma's kitchen, called Frankie. Then he whispered, don't tell him my grandma raises pigs in her kitchen. She raises pigs in her kitchen? Tom teased. Frankie didn't miss a step. Yeah, man, she goes hog wild. As they approached the hen house, Mr. Gallagher caught up and asked, what's the final tally, Tom? The final tally, Tom repeated. The words took a moment to register, and he grabbed his blue notebook, his dream sketcher, he called it, from his hip pocket and flipped it open. Well, we got 4 more cancellations this morning. That leaves maybe 10 who are still coming. 8 was more like it, but for the time being, Tom had penciled in Sosa and Gwynn just in case. Mr. Gallagher sighed. Tom knew he was disappointed. Last year they had over 20 players in the camp. The trio crossed the dirt road and headed toward the baseball diamond on Doc Altenheimer's land. Tom's notebook was his mom's idea. Since his mom was a librarian, Tom had grown up hearing her read stories out of every book in the school library, from The Science of Baseball to Coyote Tales. Then last year, she started buying him special blank books covered with blue leather that snapped shut with black elastic bands. She said these books were for him, his own stories, and he carried one with him at all times. Since they were just the right size to slip in his pocket, Tom used them from everything from baseball stats to fantasy tales to sketches of Grandma's racing pigs. Sometimes he wrote words, and sometimes he just doodled. Whatever was on his mind drifted off someplace interesting. He'd draw what he saw or jot a thought in his book. Then later, he'd turn the whole thing into a dream sketch, as he called it. But the book was not a diary, Tom insisted, nor was it a journal. He wrote no silly secrets in his notebook, no gossip, no blah blah recitation of the day's events. He found all that stuff boring. The problem with journals, Tom decided, is that they're always about what is, and Tom preferred to write about what ifs. What if you could saddle up a satellite and ride around the earth? What if your brainwaves could stop the wind and then start it up again? What if a quiet, uncoordinated kid loved baseball with such pure passion that his passion became a talent, the way a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, and turned him into a super mega superstar, even though he's only 12? As Tom crested the rise of the baseball field, his eyes fell upon White Fang Peak, the highest point on Rattlesnake Ridge. Just a few miles away, near the top of that peak, lived a man who had once had the same kind of passion for baseball that Tom had. Lots of times during Little League games, Tom stared at that mountain from his position in right field, just thinking about the man inside and his secrets. The guy was unapproachable, a mumbling recluse of the worst sort, according to all reports. Still, Tom was fascinated by what he had done. Dante Delgado. Even today, that name alone could scandalize and shambleize the hearts and minds of baseball fans across the land. Back in the early 80s, Delgado was an outfielder for the San Diego Padres. He was the league's most valuable player and batting champ. Naturally, he was a hometown hero since he was born and raised right here in Dillontown. He was also the only player in history ever to hit a home run clear out of old Jack Murphy Stadium. A cloud-busting blast, some 545 feet. But on the opening day of the '84 World Series, when the Padres were set to face the Detroit Tigers, Dante Delgado was nowhere to be found. And he never showed up the whole week as long as the Tigers ate the Padres for dinner and won the World Series 4-1. He had been perfect in the playoffs. In 5 games against the Cubs, he went 19 for 19 at the plate, and he walked away. And no one would ever understand why. That is, no one except for Tom. Lots of people had theories, but Tom understood. At least he thought so. You see, Tom understood disappearing. He would cross the street just to avoid a couple of girls from school. He would ride into the hills for hours just searching for ancient Indian sites or a big leaf maple tree. So to be hounded by packs of reporters and fans, to be in the public spotlight while trying to play perfect baseball, Tom could certainly understand the pain and pressure of that. Of course, he had never done anything as huge as letting down the ball team bound for its very first World Series. Until now. This might do it, he figured, putting his team in a spot where they had to beat the Lakeview Vikings in order to preserve the town, along with 100 years of baseball tradition. Might one day rank up there with saying adios to a team headed for the series. But before he started down the embankment, Tom spotted a dusty rooster tail from a farm truck rising off the dirt road leading to the ballpark. "Frankie," he said, "here comes your uncle and your snobby cousin Maria, and there's Will Barnes behind them." Tom watched the vehicles approach soon his mood began to change. Soon, this ancient baseball field built on a puny lakebed with its plywood-covered grandstands and peeling blue paint, its sunken pits, stone-walled dugouts with their sway-back timber roofs, the brown tumbleweeds bunched up against the backstop, soon the whole bedraggled ballpark came alive with possibilities. It was almost as if the field had a spirit of its own. In all, 7 more baseball campers, 4 boys, 3 girls had arrived, making a grand total of 9. They each crawled up onto the bleachers under the wooden roof while Mrs. Gallagher added their names to her list. Now at least they had a full team. Clifford Villanova was a surprise. He just moved here from Paula Indian Reservation, up north to live with his grandparents. Clifford sprang up to the top row and sat next to Will, big as a barn Barnes, whose father owned the tack and feed. Below them sat Rachel and Tara Gleason in the next row down, balancing a telescope across his knees. Ramon Zabala tapped away on his handheld computer. The bottom plank, little Cody Pomeroy, who, like Tara, was only 11, sat next to Frankie. Right away, Frankie challenged him to a sunflower seed spitting contest. "See if you can hit my cousin," urged Frankie. "Use the wind." Maria Flores, who was tall, strong, and could scare the breath out of any boy in town, shot up when she heard the challenge. "Try it, little gob of troll snot, and I'll dump you in that trash can and rip off your toes." And everyone knew she could do it. Troll snot, thought Tom. Good words. Secretly, he wrote them down. "Frankie, Cody," said Mr. Gallagher. "Appropriate behavior, please." He looked up. "All right, listen up, everybody. I need your attention." With those words, Tom drifted off on another thought. Far over the stone archway in center field, he knew his father. To him, talking became a teaching moment. A teaching became preaching, and Tom had learned long ago when to tune him out. In a moment, he leaned back and settled his eyes on the elderberry bush halfway up a nearby hill. Its yellow flowers waved like banners in the stadium, sending Tom off into one of the ballparks in his mind, where he found the stands filled with a roaring crowd. The locker room was a jumble with beard-stubbled men who sat bare-chested, suiting up for the game of a lifetime, taping broken finger bones to healthy fingers, spitting tobacco juice on blue-black bruises, singing and cussing like 24 bravado boys trying to hide their yard dog jitters. In that world, Tom could talk to these men, and they would listen. He would snarl his words, and they would whoop and nod. He would laugh at their fears, and they would laugh louder. Then he would stand and lead them to battle, waving a bat over his head. He would, "Tom," said his father. "Tom, are you with us?" Tom lowered his gaze from White Fang Peak to look at his dad. "Yep, yeah, I'm listening." "I asked you a question. Ramon's mother, Mrs. Sabala, wondered if we could expect any more players. You said about 10 or so, right?" All eyes turned toward Tom. With shaky hands, he opened his dream sketcher, counted names, counted heads, and then softly said, No one else. Everybody's here." "Only 9 guys," said Will. "We can't go into that game with only 9 players. That's ridiculous. No backup, no relievers. What if someone gets hurt?" That's not what he really meant. Tom and everyone knew it. Everyone knew that Will meant they couldn't go into the big game with these 9 players. And more specifically, they were bound to lose with a starting lineup that included Tara, Cody, and Tom. Mr. Gallagher studied the squad. "Well, I see a scrappy bunch here, but before we talk about relief pitchers, first we'll need a starting pitcher." "Hey, I'll pitch," said Maria, "and I can even pitch, and I can't even pitch. But so what? We have to play this game and we have to win. I don't want tons of people moving up here." Clifford jumped in. "She's right. Besides, who are these guys? A bunch of all-stars?" He grinned at everyone with a big white teeth that shined against his dark skin. But Clifford had only been here since January, so he had no clue that, yes, in fact, the Vikings team was full of all-stars. "Oh, man," thought Tom, "what a disaster. What did I get us into? This game will be pure humiliation for all of us." Frankie stood. "I say we get more players. Come on, Tom, let's call some guys up. What about Jose Maria? And where's Kevin and Troy?" They all canceled this morning. Their emails said they were going down to the hill to a soccer camp. "Traitors," Frankie slumped. "Exactly," said Maria. "Forget those guys. Forget anyone who didn't have the guts to show up. Hey, we got 9, and that's enough." Then an idea hit Tom like a beanball bonking his helmet. What if I didn't show up? If I drop out, that'll just leave us with 8. Not even enough for a team. So then there'd be no game. Then Doc would have to make up his own mind, and this time I'd help him. "Yeah, it's perfect. I'll quit." On the ball field, a dust devil kicked up, swirling around home plate. Several sun-dried candy wrappers lifted into the sky. Tom sat back watching, but he could not relax. Was this really what he wanted to do? And could he do it? Could he make himself announce to everyone that he was quitting? As he looked out toward White Fang Peak, a doubt began to rise. Dante Delgado had quit. And looked what happened to him. But what else could Tom do? This was all his fault. What else could he possibly do? He clutched his dream sketcher to his ribs to keep from shaking. He closed his eyes. He took a breath. He felt the wind blow stronger, but before he could sputter a sound, Tara stood up and pointed in the distance. Hey, look at that! All heads turned. Cresting over the dirt bank beyond center field came a horse and rider. Everyone watched as the horseman slowly made his way down the steep bank and through the iron gates beneath the stone archway. Do you believe this? Said Frankie. Not yet, said Will. Straight through center field he rode. Stretched across the back of his speckled white horse was a duffel bag and bedroll. The rider, Tom could now see, was a boy about 12, wearing a scruffy cowboy hat, blue jeans, black boots, and a pearl button shirt. He rode right up to home field. Burned into the skin of his saddle was fancy black letters were the words cruiseon.com. Full saddlebags hung down on both sides. Next to his knee, in a leather rifle scabbard, he carried a wooden baseball bat. The boy dismounted and led his horse through the side gate near the dugout and under the grandstand canopy, where the players sat with their eyes like frogs, alert. The stranger removed his crumpled Stetson. Morning, he said. Buenos dias. He looked at everyone with a shy grin. Is this the world-famous Dillontown Wildcats baseball camp? And that is the end of Chapter 2. We will pick up tomorrow on Chapter 3. So, what is going on in the first 2 chapters? What is the problem? What do you, we kind of started meeting some of the characters, so we can kind of talk about some of the characters. Just kind of your first couple thoughts going into the first 2 chapters as we kind of build this story. I know it was a long read today, so I apologize. So just kind of a short reflection on like who we've met and what your thoughts are as we begin this story. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.